Good day. Hello, everybody. This is Paul Sims speaking to you from eyeforpharma in London. Well done for making it here on time, and we're just about to get going. As you can see, today's session is called the Digitome, a platform for enabling rapid decentralization, personalization, and recruitment for clinical trials. And I'm really very excited that you could all be here. It's been a pretty popular session. I think we've had about 700 people register. Well, I'm just going to say a quick word about why we decided to put this webinar on. And I suppose it's the stark realization that today medicines really only work well in a fraction of our target patient populations. And that's obviously a huge disservice to hundreds of thousands of patients. And it's a huge contributing factor to the poor performance and failure of many clinical trials. But we can do better. We believe that technology, when it's done right, can make a real difference. And this webinar is going to be introducing this concept of the Digitome, which is effectively a data commons aggregating patient data, population data, claims data, and of course, trial data to enable identification of patients and sites on a level never seen before. And we're going to explore how such a pool of structured data can be, and unstructured data can be deployed in actually fueling smarter clinical trials, enabling personalization even down to a genomic level. We're also, of course, going to be talking about scalability, often one of the key things here, ensuring that efforts in this area don't just get stuck at pilot stage. And at the end of the webinar, we're actually going to ask you whether or not you personally want to be an active participant in helping to build and realize the Digitome and make it actually a genuinely real thing. Obviously, as you would hope, I am going to be aided in this quest by some people who are far prettier than I am. You should hopefully see their smiling faces right now. We've got Jake, Michelle, Mo, and Adama. So starting with Jake on your top left, he is the co-founder and he's the global head of BIOME, which if you're not aware, is the digital innovation lab that NOVARTIS and indeed Jake founded just about a year ago. Before that, he was actually the head of digital health innovation and taking quite a lot of responsibility for trials across NOVARTIS in his previous role. I found Jake to actually be one of the smartest and most enlightened people working in this area. I've had the fortune to talk to him a few times over the last couple of months, and some of you may have even recognized him from a webinar that we did with him earlier in the year. So really appreciate you being here, Jake. Thank you very much. I'd like to say a special thank you to Michelle, who is on the right. And the reason why I say that is because MEDABLE, Michelle's company, is actually a partner in making sure today's webinar happened, and they've been a fantastic partner, helping us to get you here and helping us to make sure that we have a really great agenda. Michelle is actually a Stanford-trained physician. She's an entrepreneur. She is very driven. She's an absolute whirlwind of activity, working in multiple dimensions to improve human health through advances in technology. And she actually founded MEDABLE in 2015 really to enable technology to be as seamless, integrated, and adaptive as the human body is. And it's a truly great company doing some really great things. So if you don't know Michelle yet, then now is a great chance to do so. And thank you for being here. On the bottom left, we have Mo. Mo is the global head of digital development at BOEHRINGER. Again, a very enlightened person and someone I've been very pleased to have talked to recently. I appear to have just actually suffered a bit of a failure on my computer, but apparently you can still see things on your side. So hopefully all is still well. I'm looking at the blue screen of death right in front of me right now, so forgive me if we're going to have a couple of technical issues. But Mo is currently the global lead for digital development at BOEHRINGER. Previous to that, he was a director within the R&D operations and innovations group at J&J, and also at the strategic program office at NOVARTIS, responsible for several online initiatives within digital health and doing a great job on all of them. Last but most certainly not least is Adama, who works at BIOGEN. She is definitely an innovator. She's a blockchain advocate. She's worked on tech-enabled clinical trials, and patient engagement. She's a very strong advocate for patient engagement, by the way, all of our speakers are, through 17 years working actually with the NHS here in the UK and in industry. So she's very much an R&D transformation change champion, as you will shortly discover. Okay, guys, so that's my introductions, and what I would ideally like to do right now is to hand over to Michelle, who's going to give us a couple of slides.
Great. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining. We are just so excited to talk about the concept of the digitome and very excited about the group we have on the call today for the webinar. I think all of us in clinical trials and in healthcare generally are both excited, overwhelmed, and also wondering, how do we really bring the data opportunity in front of us to bear, and how do we really leverage, all of this data to truly advance human health. And, what has inspired me as I've become really closer and closer to the opportunity is also the challenge in front of us, but the opportunity to work collectively and establish a true framework through a multi-stakeholder environment to really advance human health through this concept of the human digitome. So the digitome, by definition, is a digital representation of human health and disease. The idea is that we would bring data together from all facets of our lives across all populations and actually be able to make sense of this data and apply it to a number of different elements of healthcare, which we'll hit on today. It's really intended to be a science in and of itself, and it's not intended to be a proprietary framework, but really a concept and a science that we can advance collectively. So, where we stand today with disease, and my background as a physician, is really an understanding of disease that's binary, right? Where someone does or does not have a disease. But the reality is that health is a problem of really quantum complexity. And we know that, the onset of disease really starts with a deviation in homeostasis. And that what we call the symptoms of today probably manifest far earlier with deviations in homeostasis and baseline changes that could be detected through a new era of diagnostics, where we're able to really move from this binary state to detecting these subtle deviations, potentially through the data of the digitome, and be able to then have a multifaceted intervention with medications, behavior changes, that is really targeting deviations in homeostasis prior to the typical phenotypic manifestation of disease that we know today. This would actually advance healthcare to a state which we would align much more with prevention than the current state, which is intervening at disease onset or disease progression. And we feel that, by collecting the data from our everyday lives and by bringing intelligence to this, we can actually move to a state where we're detecting disease at a far earlier stage, and even opening the door to interventions that we may not know today that could be effective for the reestablishment of homeostasis. What's exciting about this is what it could really mean for human health, to advance the understanding and be able to intervene with medications, interventions, and behavioral treatments that really preclude the full development of disease. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Jake to talk about, the data inputs, the need for standardization, and what we're really defining as kind of this new scientific era of digital.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And to me, this is where the rubber really hits the road on this initiative, right? I think all of us probably on the phone can point to scores of initiatives out there around a single diagnostic where we're trying to detect disease earlier. The problem, as we all know, is that many of these things are sitting in silos, including, things like the Apple Watch that aren't necessarily linked to your EHR and your personal care doctor, or any, frankly, like meaningful algorithm to determine whether you're at a higher risk for something and should be called into your health system for an earlier checkup. And I think this is where the community, in my estimate, really needs to put much more time and attention to really thinking about the interoperability of and aggregation of all these data. And this is frankly why I am so excited about the initiative that MEDABLE is undertaking to actually make an impact in this area. As I think Michelle had pointed out in her introduction, we're now in an era where these new digital technologies are really going to have a massive implication on health. And we think that one of those massive transitional implications is going to be all of the nuanced data that is going to be recorded about people's phenotypes, right? So if we take a step back and we think about the the issue with why we haven't realized the value of personalized medicine is because we all thought that once we were able to sequence the genome, everything would be set. The problem is we don't actually have that nuanced phenotypic information to actually make comparisons across people's different genomes to really understand what it actually means. We don't have that translational element. However, we know with these new technologies like voice and accelerometers that are in Apple Watches and all the other sensors that are out there, we're going to get a lot more nuanced understanding about people's phenotypic information, their health outcomes over a longitudinal period of time. Of course, the problem now is that there's an explosion of data, as you see on this slide, with very little effort so far to really think about how to map this and then put it into a data commons for people to actually use in different applications. And this is what the Digitome and the effort by MEDABLE is really all about. So as you saw on that slide, really what the focus is to map all of those different data inputs, whether they're happening today or not happening today, and really try to think about how to actually translate them into a data commons, which I think most of you probably understand that terminology. It's more or less a common data aggregation where you can create a series of applications on top of that. So this is really an effort to break down all of the silos in healthcare and make this data much more useful to the variety of stakeholders in healthcare. So, Michelle, I'll pass it back to you.
So yeah, I think Jake really hit it on the head, which is we have this era of digital, and we're capturing data from all of these various sources. Can we map this to a common framework that makes it utilizable, across a variety of applications, whether it's detecting disease, a variety of applications in the clinical trial space, and then the healthcare management space. So part of the Digitome concept is this data commons, and a data commons where you've got a multi-stakeholder environment that can then be applied to a variety of application areas. And I think I've had a couple of conversations with Mo about what those application areas can be, and I think they're vast. It's beyond the diagnosis and management of disease. It includes a number of areas in clinical trials and in healthcare management. So let me hand it over to Mo to talk about areas where he thinks the Digitome could be applied.
Thanks, Michelle. So for the sake of sanity, to keep it short, because we can go really deep into this discussion, I'm going to pick a few areas just to give a high-level overview of where overall data harmonization could actually support augmented intelligence and insight into creating new novel trial designs which can accelerate this whole pathway. So if you look at just alone from a trial design perspective, right now that is really the core heart of all of the studies and drug development that really push the boundaries of making sure the drugs get out to our patients. And oftentimes within many companies, the level of information that is captured on existing and past studies is not accessible by trial teams. So the first thing is we need to first of all identify the information that is there within individuals' computers and SharePoints and whatever other sources they may have for past studies, protocols, feedback that they're capturing from internal teams as well as external teams, health authority associations, IRBs, any kind of letters, advisory boards, KOL insight, and ensure that all of this is, again, to Jake's point, harmonized and standardized in a location where you can access it to give you the best intelligence and outcome for writing your next level of your study protocols and designing the overall clinical trial design. And this really shouldn't just stop at that level. We should also go ahead and compare at the industry level, really what that means to standardizing that disease trial design across the board. And that really means understanding what has been done through the broader landscape. So looking at clinicaltrials.gov, looking at white papers, looking at lessons learned through other engagement or thought forums, and making sure that is captured. And the best way to really do this is to, first of all, identify your strategic side. What are the key points in your protocol that really are driving the discussion forward, and what are the ones that have stopped the discussion in your past experiences, and really capturing that within the trial teams. Once you have this from the trial design perspective, the idea here is that if you do it right, you should be able to get a protocol that is much more efficacious and acceptable by your external regulatory bodies and key stakeholders for conduct, ensuring that you are saving on those time points, reducing amendments and reducing costs. It may not seem like a lot, but if you do hundreds of protocols a year and you're running them all together concurrently in your portfolio, that time can actually add up significantly. And you're able to save quite a bit of money and quite a bit of time to accelerate your overall pipeline process. The other side here in ensuring data harmonization is kept in a standard way is for your site selection processes and identifying patients. It is no, surprise that many sponsors are looking at access to clinical trial data, as mentioned earlier on in the call today, to just claims data, to do a heat map analysis of where our patients really lie, and then also do a target outreach to the sites and locations for HCPs of where those patients are to create and develop sites. But one of the key components is when you're looking at site selection is also understanding site qualification and the interview process of bringing an investigator on board. Sometimes there is going to be a disconnect there. And what I'm talking about specifically is if you have investigators, or in this case, HCPs, who are research naive or are somewhat experienced in research, but not thoroughly, and are interested in becoming investigators for you for that insight, you need to ask questions, and that data point needs to be in this same common database. And those questions have to be based upon their current experience as an MD and a practicing physician and how they manage their practice. How they manage their practice is going to be a true understanding of how they will manage your trial and how they will manage the trial ecosystem that you hand them in the future to pursue that drug development. If they can't keep track of the patients that are growing in their general practice, how would you expect them to keep track of patients who are going to be on your clinical trial? Those are key data points that we need to understand to create a demographic map of HCPs to convert to PIs in the future, and those data points should be shared across multiple functions within an organization to create an augmented intelligence strategy. The second component around this is the patient piece, and we need to understand from a recruitment perspective of where patients are and what different data sources we need to capture. And in this, we need to also understand what data types are going to be the best data types that fit. And not all data sources and repositories are going to be made fit for purpose for what you need for your strategy. There are certain key elements you need to keep in mind. So the number of active patients that exist in such a data source, the location indicator of where those patients potentially are, the diagnosis tag, medication tag, cost of access overall, any GDPR, privacy considerations, the processing effort it requires for harmonization internally to link it to your internal systems, the granularity in terms of how granular it is, whether it's a low, medium, high, in terms of understanding what details are there and what you can access to identify the disease progression for that particular patient, how frequently it is updated. So in this case, if you're looking at a rare disease, if it's updated once a year or so, perhaps it's not an issue. But for chronic large-scale diseases, you need much more higher frequency of update. the care journey and understanding what this means, and of course, any other linkages or correlations it may have to other existing data sets. This is going to be pivotal for your selection of different data types and sources as you plan out your strategy, because without having these knowledge points and understandings, you will not pick the right data sets to identify the right patient populations and even select sites. So from a digitome perspective, really bringing all those sources together gives you the best tools forward for you to plan as you can go forward in the conduct of your study. And with that, there's different conduct of different study types, and the real-world evidence component has now picked up quite heavily with discussions with external regulators and key stakeholders. And for that, I will hand off now to Adama to talk through what real-world evidence can do as a component to accelerating drug development.
Thank you so much, Mo, and hi, everyone. It's really great to be here and to be able to connect and share some of the thoughts that on work that I've been doing and learning from many various sources, and especially some of the individuals on this panel. My context and what I really want to share is trying to understand what is the value of what we want to do. How can a digitome deliver value to the industry? So this is the healthcare industry and the pharma industry for research, and ultimately to patients. So when you think about rare disease, for example, there are opportunities that this can create. This is a population with hard to find patients, whether it's the incident rates being low or whether it's just the type of patient. It could be, a pediatric indication that is also rare, so that adds another layer of complexity. Now, what you will find is in order for the traditional model for research or gathering of data to be effective, it needs time, it needs resources. Patients in this category don't have that. So what this can create is an ecosystem that is ready to harness whatever research opportunities are existing, whatever questions need to be addressed, and also whatever efficiencies in healthcare that can actually benefit from having the centralized type of pooling of data. So I'll give you an example. There are some data repositories, that exist that contain genomic information or EMR information, because in most cases, you kind of need to pair up some of those informations to create a full picture, whether it's for a particular clinical trial. Now, there is absolute technology that exists at the moment, and if we are able to just work differently and think differently and start collecting and capturing patient data in non-traditional ways, there is a category of diseases that will benefit from actually accessing existing data repositories that are aggregated into a meaningful context and completely sponsor agnostic and can be reused and repurposed multiple times to accelerate the research activity. Obviously, this needs to have patient consent. Obviously, we need to follow and be compliant, and we also need to make sure that we have data in a structured manner that if it requires any regulatory attention, it is provided in a way that is acceptable. So with all of those considerations, I think the value of a digitome is realized. We have been doing a lot of pilots and proof of concepts to target some of those data sources, and I think we're at the point where it is important to aggregate. It is important to really create a global ecosystem, because for rare disease, we cannot be localized in one region, one country. To accelerate the process, we need to go to where the patients are. And unfortunately, we can't be in everywhere at every time, but what we can do is create an ecosystem that is digital, that is possible for us to connect and tap into when needed, and can actually deliver some value and hopefully equity in the process as well. So I just wanted to share that point of view. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adama, and thank you to Mo before you and Jake, and actually really appreciate each one of you giving us your key thoughts there. I would like to actually move on to a discussion. So we've had about half the webinar so far, and I'd really like to make sure that that you guys listening in are able to be part of this conversation. So thank you to those of you who've already sent in some questions. I'll get to those in just a moment. Please do send some more. But what I'm going to do for the moment is just find out, in terms of who in the room, where we are. So if you look at your screen right now, and by the way, before you answer this, I'll just tell you that when you signed up for this webinar, we also asked you whether or not you've deployed digital solutions in your clinical trials to date. And I can tell you that only about 100 of the 700 of you said yes extensively across a majority of trials to that, whilst obviously the rest said unsure or no. So you can obviously see that I've got a slightly more nuanced version of that question now. How advanced would you describe your company regarding digital trials today? And obviously, we're looking for something of a generalist answer. You've probably got some areas where you're more advanced than others, but in general, how would you describe this? And I'm forcing you to choose only one of these. So is it leading? You've adopted the latest technology and you feel that you are somewhat ahead. Is it intended? You're currently aiming, planning. You've got the support to be best in class. Is it conflicted? You've got perhaps progress inhibited by varying enthusiasm within the organization, perhaps some people believing that it's not necessarily focusing on being patient-focused or providing the results that need to, or being regulatory compliant, or are you behind? Desire is there, but few concrete plans, or finally, unconvinced. You currently, as an organization, have no plans to implement. So about half of you have voted so far. I'll hold that open 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much. Let's have a look at the results. Okay, so it's a relatively even spread, a bit of a normal distribution. So close to 40% say intended, so you're fully planning to be there, and a quarter of you saying behind. So obviously, our concept of the digitome is more advanced than simply just running clinical trials in a digital format. I'd love to just hear, though, from the panel as to how important this is in terms of actually making our digitome dreams become real, and whether or not you feel that there's something that we need to be doing better on the ground in order to get to where we need to be. So who wants to chip in on that?
Sure. So just to clarify,
I'm happy to just.
Oh, go for it, Jake.
Michelle, you started. Go for it.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify the question. So your question is there more we can be doing with digital now to really create the digitome?
Exactly. I guess I'm asking you, what do we need to do in terms of the digitization of conventional trials that is going to lead to a digitome being more feasible? So where do we need to focus right now?
Sure. So I think when you look at a conventional clinical trial, that could clearly be digitized to a much greater degree. And I think, kind of coming back to what Mo said, right now, when you look at the phases of clinical drug development, from trial design to feasibility to recruitment, enrollment, and then study conduct, these exist kind of in discrete processes that are largely done by kind of human-first approaches, where if we really take a tech-enabled approach or a digital-first approach, I think you can begin to generate synergies across those processes. So, if we were to start with trial design from, let's say, a data commons across clinical trials, where we could really interrogate what worked and what didn't work, even across stakeholders, so across different sponsors, looking at specific therapeutic areas, specific sites, specific patients, specific inclusion-exclusion, and really use this data commons to drive better trial designs, I think we'd start to see that is, an important input. So with the conventional methodologies, we should be leveraging what we know today to create that digital trial design. I think from there, ideally, we're piping in, real data from patients that are recruitable, engaged, interested in clinical trials, and we actually have these data sets from these patients, and we map them to that digitally optimized trial design in a world where we're also connected to sites and can understand in those sites, what are the investigator qualifications and, what patients are actually being seen in these healthcare ecosystems. Clearly, we're a very far way from that. But I believe that as we, advance the use of technology in these processes synergistically, we'll get much closer to, realizing this digitome concept because we'll be utilizing data in new ways, creating new synergies across those processes. And then the obvious one is in the trial conduct. Being able to capture data seamlessly from patients and from sites, making that digital first, transitioning from a world where we do paper transcription, but to truly digital first data capture. I think that's, all of those are really important initiatives. And we can think about the application of digital to those various areas and creating synergy across them. I think in conversations that I've had with Jake and he has some really bold and interesting ideas, is where, and I'd love to have him talk about this more, but, is there a world where we're living our lives and research is in the background? And it's not just research, but it's actually about optimization of our individual health. So I don't know if, Jake, you kind of want to talk about more outside of what we now know as a traditional clinical trial framework, but kind of your vision for where research and healthcare could merge.
Yeah, absolutely, Michelle. So I think one concept that we've talked a lot about as a community looking to shift our paradigm on how we do typical clinical research is how do we bring more of that into the real world? How do we blend more of the randomized controlled trial approach to clinical research and blend it with all the real world activities that are going on a day-to-day basis where people are generating health data. And I think a concept like the digitome could really help there, right? Where you can imagine patients throughout the world living their lives, being treated for their disease as they were, but yet generating very important data that's being captured in a very systematic and structured way to really give us much better insight on how they're performing across different therapy regimens, giving their doctors a lot more information and ability to change therapeutic courses with much more nuanced insight, of course, to really have, more rapid, if I can say, more rapid experimentation being done in the real world, right? So, I mean, a lot of us have I think a nervousness about crossover experimentation, but actually, if you think about it, this is actually goes on a lot in the real world where there's an uncertainty around how treatments are performing, and your doctor simply changes your prescription for lack of knowledge, and all of this stuff needs to be captured in a meaningful way and used to really give more meaningful data back to our research community so that we can make better decisions about treatments for patients, what treatment should be first line, second line, third line, and frankly, what treatments should actually ultimately be brought to the market. I think we can use a lot more real world research, as we all know, to do that. But of course, as we pointed out, the problem is right now a lot of that data that's being generated, as we know, is either not systematically captured, or if it is captured, it's really not captured in a way that's shareable and analyzable across the broader research community. And again, that's why I think, the folks on the phone, that's why we're so passionate about driving some sort of initiative like the Digitome to enable that.
Awesome.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, go for it, Michelle, please.
Oh, I was just really curious also, from Adama's lens, what is she thinking around the application of data in the digitome to new disease areas, and specifically areas, where we're developing drugs that have not, into therapeutic areas that we haven't treated before?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. This is a growing area in most companies where there are obviously new assets acquired, as you want to expand your portfolio, but you also want to expand your current existing assets into new indications, second and third indications. The opportunity to use a digitome or some kind of available access to real data in a prospective and retrospective way creates a better picture for new indications, especially around indications where control is challenging. You can actually start to isolate some of the control data and the control groups and have dialogue with regulators so that as you progress into your advanced phases of your trials, you can start to leverage some of the data that is cleaned up and relevant to that particular asset and those particular data endpoints or whatever that you want to identify. I think what is really key for me here is ensuring that not only is the database or whatever ecosystem is created contains the right data in a structured way, but it is also possible for the owners of that data to be able to interact with the system. Because as that data is continued to be repurposed, whether it's going into new therapeutic areas to build a bigger, wider ecosystem or to repurpose existing data, those patients need to be engaged. They can drive, as you've heard, determining on the direction of research, but most importantly, they can also drive how that research addresses their needs and how that data is being made more and more available. I think it's a kind of a two-way situation that the more the engagement continues, the better and more enriched the digitome will become, because a lot of that information will not just come from data sources in healthcare systems. It can also come from advocacy groups. It can come from wearable data. This is now interacting with an individual, and having them buying into this is just as important as creating, the APIs and the connectivities and the regulatory frameworks and the buy-in. It's all equally just as important. So just wanted to put that context across. Thank you.
Adama,
thank you,
exactly
Adama.
To your point, I think it's also it's also very important, Adama, to go ahead and point out that what you're saying, goes beyond just even a novel, therapeutic area, but even understanding and validating novel endpoints that may lead towards the use of to prove that therapeutic area, right? So when you look at the digitome and the capture of different data sources, whether they're coming from traditional or non-traditional sources to wearables, platforms, and devices, we need to standardize that. And that's not something that one company can do alone. And one company can't do alone even now for standardization of a particular population because of lack of diversity, which exists in the standard clinical trial design. So you can imagine what that would mean for wearables and sensors. You would have to do it together. And the ability to do it together also opens up the access to different types of data points that you're absolutely correct would enrich the overall diversity set, right? So you're not looking at one particular subset of one population, you're allowing access to minorities and even different components of different people who are not currently participating in trials, and even from the fact of just having more females in clinical trials, because generally right now for most clinical trials, you have that as an exclusion criteria for females of childbearing potential. So how would you go ahead and validate that, for a particular novel endpoint for a novel disease area when you don't have the adequate subset of populations there to represent it for what that validation of the algorithm will look like? So I think this is an opportunity that is really critical for the digitome to go beyond, just the 4 people here on the call, but really look at across the industry as a call to bring us all together to really share this understanding so we can create the standardization and validation of these novel endpoints and areas of focus.
Thank you. What I would love to do is to bring the audience in. We've had a few questions, so thank you very much for that. So I'm just going to read a few of these out, and you can choose to answer some of them. Firstly, loving the aim for interoperability. How do you connect with and advance from various cross-industry initiatives such as Transcelerate, AMI, and DIME, so that we limit what needs to be built and ensure that we're not replicating work done elsewhere? Would love to get feedback from the speakers on where they see AI fitting into the model and whether or not that can enhance what the digitome is able to do. How does the digitome relate to or implement the results from CTTI, and whether or not that is involved at all? What examples of global patient data sources, EMR labs, others do you actually see? What are the specific sources that are going to be most helpful in supporting the vision and making the usability of the digitome actually happen? So a few questions from the audience there. There's obviously been a few more, but I think that's probably enough for the moment. So who wants to take those?
I can maybe weave the first two questions together around interoperability and how AI plays into it, because I think those are two critical things that are absolutely related. So let me just say something at a high level. The data needs to be joined in a much more meaningful way for AI to be actually to be used, right? So let me talk about the interoperability piece. So I think it's absolutely critical that we somehow engage with all of the relevant folks that are looking at various aspects of interoperability and data standards, some of which were mentioned in the question. Others which are absolutely key would be HL7 and their FIRE initiative, which a lot of people are very excited about. And so I think the digitome, I think the important point here is that really what we need to make the digitome work is an engaged community that's really talking about the standards in which we need to bring to the table or join together that may have already been developed in order to make this work. And this community, by the way, needs to be much broader than industry. It needs to be healthcare professionals, payers, and this is the magic of what happens when you create a scientific discipline to look at this, which is ultimately what we hope to catalyze. It goes way beyond any independent stakeholders' biases and motives, right? And that's absolutely what we need to do here. I think being in the pharma industry, I think it's upon us to really help catalyze that. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do for patients. And by the way, it will have the added benefit of helping us do research more efficiently. So I think it's absolutely key. And to the person asking that question, we have to leverage things that have already been done in this area. With regards to the AI question, I think this is one of these things where AI is experiencing a lot of hype in the industry right now. Everything is AI enabled that when you go and talk to, external providers, I think what most people are starting to realize right now is it's easier said than done. And actually the way in which you make AI work well, because really what we're talking about when we talk about AI is more narrow AI and particularly within that machine learning, right? And with machine learning, you need actually really good data training sets. The problem with healthcare data, of course, is that it's very siloed right now, and there's very few data sets that we trust to be very good training sets for machine learning algorithm. And that's why you're seeing very narrow applications of machine learning to things like, diagnosing pathology reports much more easily, right? But that doesn't necessarily translate into these broader applications that we really want to get to. So by creating a data commons and interoperability, I think it will actually power a new set of machine learning applications that will really have significant impact on healthcare and research as well.
Yeah, I think, kind of to add to that, the interoperability piece is obviously incredibly important, and there are a number of challenges kind of to different geographies in tackling that. But it is something where kind of through generating consensus around ethics and standards, we can begin to really tackle that. I think on the machine learning front, the other important part is really to kind of open source some of those tools so that you can really demonstrate reproducibility. So one of the things we've worked on, in the Digitome framework, and really excited for people to start utilizing these tools, are exposing these machine learning tools in R and in Python directly to data scientists, and then being able to create algorithms across those data sets that other people can really test and validate. Because, one of the things we're seeing as we're, really trying to advance AI into, an accepted form factor for clinical decision support and diagnosis is that, the black box of neural networks is something that, the regulatory authorities are not comfortable with. With that said, I think there will continue to be these types of models that don't have full kind of clarity around some of the underlying logic. When you look at just the actual substance behind deep learning, However, reproducibility is one way to really show the validity of the model and the approach. So I think that really having a framework that people can test, you can try across different scientists, and where you have that reproducibility on the AI is super critical to showing the validity of the findings in the models in the way in which we can leverage the digitome data for diagnosis and for disease detection.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you to all of you. I'm going to ask another audience poll question to just keep us moving here. We've only got 10 minutes left, though, so if you haven't asked a critical question that you want to get asked, then please do throw it in now. In the meantime, take a look at your screen. In your digital hybrid trials, how many novel digital endpoints are potentially supporting or will eventually, sorry, there's a word missing there, will eventually be the primary endpoint? So do you think that's going to be 5 or more, perhaps 2 to 4, 1 only, 0, none are currently digital? So this is and then the final option is we're not running any digital or hybrid trials currently. So this is obviously going to be most relevant to those who are doing this at the moment, and this just gives us an idea of what level of information retrieval, what level of exposure we're actually able to get here. So I can see that I've got about 40% of you voted so far. Hold it open another 3 seconds. Let's get it up towards the top. 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much. Let's have a look at the results. Okay, so it's what I expected, although actually there's probably a higher number at the top than I was perhaps expecting. So that's interesting. Interested to know from any of the panel whether or not they have their own view that they would like to push on here. There's actually less people just choosing 1 than I expected. Whether or not maybe quantity is not the key thing here. Maybe it's quality, but very interested in the panel's response.
Yeah, Paul, I think this is what I would expect, to be honest, right? Because as the technology is maturing now and the availability of it to be integrated into clinical trial, designs becomes more and more popular, I expect these numbers to grow. But even having 1 right now and going up, that is really enormous, because if you really add them up, you're looking at almost 40%, that have this level of experience that are using this novel endpoint within their clinical trial design. So that's a significant number to me. And that really shows there's a great deal of progress. If you asked this question 3 years ago, it would have been almost nothing. So the fact that we have grown this much in the past 3 years really shows that there's an increasing appetite. And as more and more of this now comes forward within the tech space, as you see, Google recently just had acquired Fitbit, and Google and Amazon and Apple, they all now have venture capital arms that are looking into buying out healthcare solutions and devices. So I really see that becoming more standardization in terms of the data they're capturing that could be used for such overall trial design and inclusion in primary and secondary endpoint. But it starts from the external consumer space and goes in to really create a pressure within the regulatory environment and framework to really move towards that. And the FDA has launched the Informed Incubator for Artificial Intelligence and the assessments of these types of novel data points. They have launched effort in the decentralized clinical trial areas. Within Europe, you have the IMI effort now kicking off. And all these things take time, but the fact that there is awareness and recognition of this really shows that these numbers are going to probably end up growing more and more in the future.
I think that's a great point that Mo makes, that when you look at the total number actively working on digital endpoints, it's not an insignificant portion, right? So I think that really stems from the fact that we all recognize that there is a subjectivity and a lack of kind of what we need from the current primary endpoints across a number of TAs. So it's exciting to see the momentum, and I think the point is phenomenal that 3 years ago you would have never seen 40%. I think it's been really, the conversation has been advanced. And I think, specifically DIME and that organization and cities work in this space has really helped to advance how we understand digital endpoints, the validity behind them, and combined with, a science around the digital piece, then we can bring these to bear, I think, a lot faster.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to head back to a few audience questions. So would it help, and why wouldn't it, that if data nodes like CTMS, EHR, HIE, etc., all map forward onto MEDDRA or CDISC or some researchable foundation? So I think the key questioner here is trying to focus on whether or not there's a greater level of research that will be able to go into this. Another question, how do you combat the inertia in drug development and overall lack of desire to change from sponsors and service providers and research sites? And then finally, one more, traditional setup trials get jeopardized by patient-to-patient contact via social media. Do you think that the digitome might actually help to improve this, especially in a rare disease environment? So 3 more questions there. Who wants to respond to any of those?
It's Adama here. I'd give it a go in terms of the inertia that you typically find with some companies when it comes to introducing these types of novel solutions, whether it's digital endpoints or just technologies that support trials or enable faster or more efficient trials. I have to say that this is apparent in many things that we do. You know, before we adopted EDC or eCOA, it literally was like climbing Mount Everest. It took years to get the first person up there, but as soon as we did achieve that, it's now become the norm. So I think we should look at it as our industry is conservative. We have people who've worked a certain way for many years. We also have tight regulations. However, there are some success enablers that we need to look at and focus on. And for any change, of course, there is going to be a trade-off. Because if you think of the technologies we're talking about, we're not suggesting something to be in place of something that doesn't exist. There are already solutions that exist. So what we want to demonstrate is that there is a relevant trade-off that will offer a higher and more significant value to all stakeholders. But in order to do that, it requires an investment in time, in senior leadership commitment, in establishing internal processes and SOPs, in making sure that people are trained and sensitized internally and externally, so that the drivers are coming from all directions and we kind of move together. But I think one of the most important things is why we're here today. If we look at things from an individual company's perspective, those incremental changes will be slower and harder. But if we can come together in a very pre-competitive way and start to create standardized ways of working, start to co-create and work on similar use cases that we can benefit from, then I think we can exponentially grow, and we can make that shift less painful and more of our traditional evolutions and transformations. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Thank you, Adama. Does anyone want to respond? And also, yeah. So also say just, Jake, we're almost out of time, so this may be your final comment. So give us a good rounding up one as well, if you can.
Okay. So yeah, I would like to really emphasize what Adama just said. I think this really has to be done in a community context, and it has to be broader than industry. It has to be considering payers, providers, regulatory agencies, right? And if I was just to reflect a little bit on the original moonshot, right, of how we actually landed a man on the moon, 8 years after some president in the U.S. said we're going to do it without really little plan to do so. It really took the effort of something like 20,000 companies and 400,000 workers to actually contribute to that. So things like this that are going to be absolutely transformational have to have a community around them. And I think that's why we're all on the phone today, is to hopefully encourage some folks on the phone to go back and have conversations with their leadership and their peers. And let's try to kind of get this community started, right? And so I guess that'll be my final thought, Paul.
That's a great one, Jake. And in terms of getting the community started, we would absolutely welcome any expressions. You can either just say so in the questions box, or you can send us a message about whether or not you would like to be informed and be a part of efforts going forward to actually get this built. As Jake's just said, this does require a community effort as opposed to being any single one company that's going to be able to pioneer it. So we are looking for those expressions. So anyway, does Mo, Michelle, or Adama want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would add here is our industry within pharma, to me, I see a lot of parallels within the aviation industry. If you look at where the aviation industry is now currently, where it was maybe perhaps 10 years ago, there's a lot of similarities in terms of what it took to get there. And a lot of it was the availability of technology and access, and which kind of forced the industry to move in a certain direction to provide ease of access for its consumers to then book and have that overall experience where it had left pretty much no choice because that's where everyone is going. And I think now within pharma, you are seeing that with this tech push coming through altogether. And the regulators are also realizing this as well. So I do see us moving similarly in that same parallel, I guess, mapping. And I do see us, working together in that same mapping to make sure that it's overall realized.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, it comes down to that community and a combined effort. So, anyone who's interested, please shoot us an email. We're starting the effort at digitome@medable.com, and our goal really is to start to tackle these issues around interoperability, data standardization, algorithm development and validation, and then the application of these tools, into clinical trials and into healthcare management. So thanks everyone for joining today. We'll have some follow-on material for you and for those who joined, and a huge thank you to the speakers who were able to join us.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Does Adama, you want to say anything final, or are we done?
I echo everyone on the panel, and I just want to leave people, hopefully with some energy, to say, if you have an idea, please don't be afraid. Be bold. We are all together on this, and I think the more we come forward with all of our wacky and good ideas, I think the more we'll be successful. So just be bold. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to ask you guys to join us next year in Philadelphia or Barcelona. We've got our upcoming meetings where we're going to be focusing on this specific issue as well as digitizing trials in general. And there'll be specific tracks for those focuses. So it's either March 31st to April 2nd in Barcelona or April 15 and 16 in Philadelphia. And I very much hope that you can be part of that. And then I would also like to say a particular thank you to our panelists, but also in particular to Michelle and her team at MEDABLE for making today's webinar happen, and indeed all the work that the organization has done to promote and elucidate the concept of the digitome, which, as we can all see here, is a pretty darn useful thing that we all need to progress the evidence generation and general well-being of our patient populations to a greater degree. So thank you so much, guys, for sticking with us, and hope that you found some interest here. I'll hold open the Q&A box for us a minute or two more so you can send in your expression of interest / give us any suggestions for how we can proceed going forward from here in future sessions. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day, and we will see you again very shortly. Bye-bye.